Okay, I just have to double check if we are live. I'm live
Hmm.
on my StreamYard, but I'm not sure if we are now live on YouTube. So just going to see if we are. I have Oh yes, everything is working. So I guess I'll start with my introductory statement, and then we could jump straight into discussion. So welcome everyone. Thanks for tuning in. I have not streamed here in over a year. Most of you know that I am Russian, yet there's been little content on YouTube related to Russia, unlike my Substack or Telegram, if you want to read it. But I'm trying to fix that and see if people would be interested in building bridges between Russian and Western media in such times as these. And so today I have a great guest who is genuinely one of the most interesting people in the Russian political space. I've been following him for, I think, when he started his Russian YouTube channel for a very long time. He's leader of the Russian right wing Libertarian Party, also runs a news organization called SVTV. Now, the Russian political scene usually gives you two options. Either you're like a complete chud who is pro Putin, totally uncritical of the government and Russian society more broadly, or you're like a hyper oppositional figure who is anti Russian, totally critical of everything related to Russia and genuinely aligned with forces hostile to it. So Mikhail Svetov is neither. He thinks for himself and holds opinions I respect, namely Russian nationalism, pro freedom, pro alignment with the West, and he genuinely has unique and thought provoking.
Depends on your definition of the West, because currently it.
Yes, no, yeah. We'll get into it. Yeah,
Mhm.
and thought-provoking takes across the board. Hopefully, in this live stream, we're going to cover as much topics as possible. Obviously, people would like to know who you are, your ideology. Talk about the war in Ukraine. If you're a Russian guest, we have to talk about the war in Ukraine, Russian society, ideology in general, like libertarianism, the state of freedom in the world, possibly other global events, and of course, future state of relationship between Russia and the West, as well as answer questions from the audience at the end. So hope that was a good introduction. If I misrepresented you in any way, let me know. But the first thing I want to discuss with you is this. You're a famous right-wing Russian intellectual, yet you're currently living in exile in Brazil, which is very far away from Russia. So how did that happen exactly?
Well, it happened like with everyone else. I have a criminal investigation opened against me in Russia. I'm wanted by the federal police, so I can't really go back without going to
Hmm.
jail. And this forced me into exile, and I chose Brazil for many reasons. One of them is that in this situation where Russia is pretty much in Cold War against Europe, it's
Hmm.
problematic for a political figure to actually stay in Europe
Yes.
because other than you are unable to speak freely and speak what you think. Brazil is very well distant from this conflict, so I actually feel free to say what I mean and to say what I want to say when everyone else, let's say, feels much more precautious about their situation. That's what happened with a lot of liberal media in Russia who used to be oppositional to the Kremlin's regime, and they are still, but they are also weirdly loyal to the European establishment to
Yes.
the point where you are certain that they are actually part of the propaganda wing for the European establishment. So I moved to Brazil. One of the reasons why I moved to Brazil is because it actually allows me enough political freedom to say what I want to say without feeling insecure about being deported or things like that. So I'm grateful to Brazil for
Hmm.
sheltering me, but obviously it's not a country I would have chosen to live in for ideological reasons. It's a very left-leaning country, and I'd say it has the worst of this, like the third world countries and the first world countries, but it has good things as well. Like the climate is perfect, and Rio de Janeiro is genuinely a beautiful city. So here I am.
Yeah, that's excellent. I have a soft spot for Brazil, but let's go back, in time. Just think about what made you a foreign agent and how the Russians have opened the criminal investigation. Because if something like that were to happen here in Canada, let's say, or in the United States, people would assume you have, killed a couple of people, that you were a mass murderer, or you support terrorism. So what exactly happened for you to deserve all of this punishment?
Well, basically, the actual federal investigation was opened against me for singing a song in Ukrainian, and it was
Hmm.
a parody song, and yeah, it has some gnarly lyrics, but I sang it as a joke in my YouTube, not in my YouTube channel, sorry, in my Telegram. I just sent it a voice message to my friends, and a Russian propagandist, how do you say, like this. Um, like a media personality. His name is
Hmm.
Poznyakov. He's the leader of the male state movement, I think it's translated into English. And he basically wrote
Hmm.
a report on me to the Russian police, and that was the pretext for opening investigation against me. But the real reason, obviously, is my political work. I was the main organizer of the largest political rallies in Putin's history. In 2016, I organized rally in defense of Telegram. It was attended by over 40,000 people. A rally in defense of the freedom of speech. It was attended by 60,000 people and a few more. So this put me on the map as a Russian oppositionist, and I used to be probably more liberal than I am today in
Hmm.
2016,
Yeah.
because I held some misguided not misguided ideals, but let's say I was duped into believing that the West or the European Union held certain ideals which they abandoned recently to the degree I could never imagine would happen. So I was more liberal back then, and that made me a common figure in Russian liberal opposition movement. But after a while, we parted our ways, and I'm basically the most hated person in the Russian liberal circles today, probably.
Yes. Why do they hate you so much exactly?
Precisely because I kept my independence, and to the large degree, I was able to keep my independence thanks to my independent income. I invested into Bitcoin in 2012 when it was just appearing online, and it costed less than $5 back then. So it allowed me to keep my financial independence when they were relying on foreign grants, on USAID, on
Hmm.
foreign funds, etc. So this made me critical of the things they had to say to toe the line to keep their funding, and little by little they antagonized me and pretty much expelled me from their I don't know, how do you call it, a club,
Yeah.
from their group. Yeah, so today we're pretty much parted our own ways, and I have zero respect for them today, even though I worked with them closely in 2016, 17, 18, and 19.
Yeah, because whenever your name mentioned in these circles, people usually they called you like a Z supporter, that you're
I'm a Russia
support.
supporter, and I
Yeah.
always have been. And one of the things that I'm really proud of, I had a lecture tour across Russia. I visited over 70 cities with my lectures about libertarianism and the state of political affairs in Russia. And my biggest lecture that was attended by over 1,000 people in Moscow, it was called "A Lesson in Patriotism," a lesson in nationalism, because I
Hmm.
was explaining that in order to oppose Putin, you don't have to be liberal, you don't have to be like servant to the Western countries. You can be independent, and without patriotism, without loving your own country, there is no better future. There is no brighter tomorrow. So I'm very consistent in my views from the
Hmm.
very beginning in this sense. But it was always. I think my liberal friends always felt like this was a pose, and when they realized it is not a pose, that I actually believe these things, that's when the real rift started between us.
Yeah, that's interesting because, in the opinion of many Russians, the West is associated with European Union, with all of these institutions. Here, where I live, we typically associate the West with whatever America does, the ideals which came from the Enlightenment, and then eventually found their way into the United States. And So we assume states like, like Israel, like Argentina, basically everyone who is aligned geopolitically with the United States, we view them as part of the Western world. So what I, really mean when I talked about the West initially, that I said that we want to explore the Russia-West connection, I really meant the, Western ideals, the Enlightenment ideals, and the geopolitical alignment with the United States over, let's say, Europe, because, as you said, Europe has been drifting away from freedom. They're, doing this like equivalent of the Russian closed telegram called Max. I forgot the name. It is referred to in the European Union. They're imposing draconian censorship measures, and you've got this upcoming UK digital IDs, so you could use your social media. So I meant, alignment with liberal and American principles. And what are you?
I'd separate European Union and the U.S. I think these are
Yes.
two very distinctly different political systems. And when talking about European Union, I think the something I keep repeating in my own streams is that Russia is Europe, and Putin's regime is practically indistinguishable from a regime of MERS or
I would
from
say it's
regime of
far
Emmanuel
worse,
Macron.
but you can go ahead.
I'd say it's much more similar than it is worse. I mean, the worst part is like, okay, if you compare Russia in 2019 and United Kingdom in 2026, I'd say they are on the level. So yeah, Russia is ahead of Europe for like Russia lives in the future of Europe, let's say. So Europe is lagging behind by 6 years, but it's veering in the same direction. It has exactly the same issues, and the political class pursuing exactly the same goals. So yeah, right now Russia is worse than Europe because Russia is at war with its neighbor, because the war is not going well, because political class is practically refuses to acknowledge the reality of the failed war, and just keeps pushing on without any strategy, without any plan on how to actually win it. So this makes Russia worse than Europe, but everything else is the same. The state of political freedoms within Russia, yeah, again, it's worse because the war is taking place, but internet freedoms are, I'd say, soon going to be on par with what is happening in United Kingdom. For example, there are no requirement for identification in order to log into the internet. Yes, Putin managed to create this like firewall kind of thing that isolates Russian internet from the rest of the world. But in order to connect to the internet, you are not required to show your ID. You are not required to provide your biometrics data, etc., etc. And in Europe, that's where things are heading. And in my opinion, that's just terrifying. And it's heading like in full speed in France, in UK, and in Australia as well. And so Russia is Europe. And I think if you start to look at the political situation through that lens, you will see a lot of similarities, culturally, politically. Like this idea, I'd love for Russia to, I'd like Russia, like the image that Russian propaganda sells to the West about what Russia is. I'd love Russia to be that image. Because like this, champion of the Western values, of traditional Western values, a champion of the Russian identity and cultural identity, national identity. But it's this image is only sold to the West. Within Russia, these values, traditional values, Christian values, they're not dominating, and the government does everything in order to subdue them, just like it happens in Europe. So it's not always visible from outside of Russia, but from within Russia, it's plainly obvious.
Yeah, so a lot of Western writers, especially American ones, they could regard Russia as this paradise of traditionalism, conservative values,
I'd
and
say
they.
Russian women, for example, Russian women, that's what I
Yeah.
keep seeing online all the time. Russian women are some of the least traditional women in Europe, some of the most pragmatic, some of the most feminized and liberated in the Western sense. So you can't see it from outside of Russia, but from within Russia, it's again something you can't ignore. So
Yeah,
this image
well,
is like completely false. It just does not
yeah, I
represent
sort
reality.
of agree with you, but from their perspective, they're seeing this. For example, the street interviews of Russian women. Usually, they're they look pretty. They conform to the standard gender roles. Even their obsession with money is nothing else than the reinforcement of the old patriarchal sort of values of the man being a breadwinner and the woman, essentially living off the man, but providing some value of its own. So like from that perspective, it does seem traditional. At least, what's your response?
Well, my response is that, yeah, Russian women were fed up with feminism during the Soviet era because men and women were exploited just as much as men were. They worked the hardest jobs. They worked in mines. They worked in fields. So, yes, they are striving for this feminine ideal, but also mentality of a Russian woman is such that they, again, like I said, they are very pragmatic. They are very calculating. And I, I challenge you to find a honestly Christ-believing woman in Russia. So they are like whatever they call traditional values in Russia, or what government calls traditional values in Russia, does not align with what the average Westerner imagines when we talk
Yeah.
about traditional values. Because again, Christianity in Russia is much more political, like a religious wing of the government than a proper religious institution. Unfortunately, I'd like to see it changed, but that's how things are. And a lot of people who call themselves culturally Russians, they never read a Bible. They have no idea. They're not following the gospel. They are not believers in any sense of the word. So that's what I mean when
Yeah,
I say that.
would you
Yeah.
say this sort of Russian trad, LARP identity is mostly like a form of aesthetic, and on ideological level, if you read the works of like, people like Dugin, it's basically a rejection of, this Western liberal slash globalistic slash enlightenment values, assumptions and principles, and without like necessarily offering something of their own. It's just a
Yeah, that's the problem with Dugin. I'm
yeah.
actually fascinated by his popularity in the West, but his critique of the West is on point and sharp and interesting. But whenever you try to find the alternative, like what his perfect society looks like, his philosophy collapses. And he actually
Yes.
gave an interview about it a couple of weeks ago in Russian, where he couldn't answer a straightforward question. Like, yes, okay, so your critique is fine, it's great, but what are you suggesting? And I was fascinating actually to see how little he could reply. So yeah.
Yeah, I'm actually, a little bit, shocked talking with you. I'm reading your essays and looking at your SVTV. I haven't, listened to you live in a while, probably for more than a year. Your views like seem to have really shifted. I remember you were like a lot more liberal than you are, talking with
No,
right
I
now.
used to be more liberal than I am today, but I don't think that my views changed that sharply. Um, I'd say I'm disappointed with Europe, and I
Hmm.
expected more of Europe, and I don't see a salvation coming from Europe anymore.
Hmm.
Because back in the 2016, I actually looked up to European Union and looked up to European project as something to not to strive for, but at least as a positive example of a country building, of the nation building. But today it's the exact opposite. Like nothing good can come from Europe as it is today. Nothing good. And this is not something you should. This is a cautionary tale. This is not an example to follow. And that's the only good thing that you can get from modern Europe today.
Hmm. Would you say a lot of your attitudes towards Europe, at least in the past few years, has been informed by the European Union's involvement in the Russo-Ukrainian war and the kind of draconian sanctions that they're putting on regular Russian people?
I mean, it probably played a role, but a very minor one. No, I think the biggest reason why I'm disillusioned with Europe is because they betrayed the the moral superiority that they claimed they had, like the moral superiority in terms of, protecting freedom of speech, protecting individual freedoms, protecting freedom of thought, which disappearing right now on the European continent, protecting political competition, which again disappears in Europe. Like what happened in France is, to me as a Russian, is unbelievable. I'm talking about Marine Le Pen being denied to run in presidential election, and the only reason it happened is because she has too good of a chance to win. And the similar things are happening in Europe as well. Like Tommy Robinson, he's the kind of person we in Russia would have called a dissident. He's a political figure. He's obviously being prosecuted for his political beliefs and for his political work, and nobody seems to care. And nobody in the media seems to care. Like you don't, unless you read some fringe right-wing media outlets, you don't see any news about him. You don't see them covering, them accusing him of terrorism, things like that. Like absurd. Like the country that just faced the worst sexual scandal in the history, I think, like with those thousands of children being raped by the Pakistani rape gangs. And they are not designated terrorists. Every time someone kills a person on the street, the first thing police says that, they do not consider it an act of terrorism, even if it plainly looks like an act of terrorism. But in case of Tommy Robinson, he's a designated terrorist in the UK just because he says some inconvenient truths. So to me, this was like his story, and story of people like him was a big reason why my perception of the West shifted. Again, today I see many more similarities between Russia and Europe in general than I see differences. Yes, Russian collapse is a little bit more advanced than European collapse, but the trends are the same. The direction is the same.
Actually, when you said what happened in France, I didn't think of Marine Le Pen. I immediately thought of the arrest of Pavel Durov, and over
Yeah,
him.
that too. Because for me it's a personal story, because I ran first of all, one of the biggest political rallies in the modern history of Russia, but also the only successful one, because we actually succeeded, not us personally, but we were part of this success. We actually achieved our goal is that Telegram is actually working in Russia right now. So to me, it was a personal story, because back then, every media outlet in the West, in Europe, like the Telegraph, the Times, the Le Monde, whatever, the Deutsche Welle, they were writing about what is happening in Russia. They were talking about, this assault on freedom of speech, assault on democracy, things like that. But when the same thing happened with Pavel in Paris, and I'd say it was even worse, because in Russia, Pavel was never arrested, but he was arrested for a while, at least in Paris. It provoked the opposite reaction. He was accused of facilitating terrorism. He was accused of facilitating exchange of child pornography, things like that. And the exactly same arguments the Kremlin used to crack down on Telegram. So again, similarities are striking, and it's something that was less obvious to me in 2016 than it is today. But I was already skeptical in 2016, but to much lesser degree, of course.
Yeah, so when you said that, I'm disappointed in the West because the European Union is turning towards authoritarianism, which nobody can deny at this point. But to me, it sounds like, well, yeah, of course, European Union has always been, this strict, centralized organization that wants to impose a certain kind of European civic identity on its society that broadly aligns with.
But it's like with the whole transgender ideology. What is a European? They cannot answer that. Same way that the Democrats in the U.S., they can't answer what is American. They keep telling that it's not a national identity, and okay, then it's a cultural identity. But if you have multiculturalism, you can't have a cultural identity, so it's nothing. It's like there is no answer to that, and they're not even looking for the answer. So that's the main issue with Europe and the U.S. today.
Well, the United States, I think that the American identity has largely been civic for longer than it was in
Yeah, but
the.
it was civic. That's the point.
Mhm.
Today, the U.S. is losing its civic identity, and I'm
Yes,
much more
that's
aligned with
true.
us. I'm much more aligned with civic nationalism than I am with ethno-nationalism.
Hmm.
But I recognize that we are reaching the point where ethno-nationalism will be the only answer, because civil nationalism and the civic identity is so thoroughly destroyed. There's nothing except ethnicity that you can grasp to, and in my opinion, it's a disaster because it's a much more primitive way of organizing society, and it's much less ambitious way of organizing society. But we are being left no choice except grasping to it because everything else is destroyed. And that's what's happening in Europe. That's what happens in the US. And in this particular case, to a slightly lesser degree in Russia. But we can discuss why
Yeah,
later.
yeah. Let's discuss this because, so for example, if we're talking about European or American, probably American identity is a better example. So there is a very clear understanding of what a civic European identity is. For Russia, there is some understanding of the Russian ethnic identity, but the civic identity of Russia, nobody knows like what the hell that even
I
is, right?
disagree completely. I
You
disagree completely.
okay? Then
It's just
make
like
your argument. Let's
so.
argue.
First of all, I disagree with both parts of your statement. I
Mhm.
don't understand what is European civic identity is. It's you being you being a subject of European bureaucracy. That's the only identity right now
Well,
I can
I
think of.
didn't say European. I said American. So I was specifically
Okay.
comparing the United States and Russia.
Okay. Okay. In that case, I'd say Russian civic identity is actually incredibly strong because whenever someone leaves Russia, go like if you meet Russians in outside Russia, they introduce themselves in Russian, even if they are Tatars, even if there are
Hmm.
some Chechens. There are some ethno-nationalists who keep identifying with their minor like ethnic identity, but cultural identity is overarching. So in that sense, Russian identity is still very welcoming, but at the same time, very strict in a sense that you have to, you have to speak Russian if you want to be Russian. If you want to be Russian, which is no longer case in France, for example. There's a lot of French civic nationals who don't speak French. If you want to identify with, you have to share Russian culture. You have to share Russian history, and you have to identify with Russian history. You have to identify with the Russian struggle in general. So again, it's a very like broad identity, but it also has shape where a European identity at the moment is shapeless. American identity has a shape as well. You have to identify with values of the founding fathers. You have to recognize the superiority of the American political system. You have to you have to be culturally embedded into the American society,
Hmm.
which is collapsing right now as well.
Yeah, well, I actually completely agree with your take on what American civic identity actually is and its current trajectory towards collapse. But I mean, I strongly disagree with you on the Russian example. So, for example, there's Chechens, there's Dagestanis. They don't really identify with Russian culture at all.
No, no.
If you look,
Let's distinguish. This is important. Yes, there are large parts of Chechens, large part of Dagestanis who do not identify with being Russians, but they have an option of abandoning their ethnic identity in favor of the civic identity of the broadly Russian person, and it
yes,
happens
and
all the time.
very
It
few of
happens
them
all the
make
time.
this choice.
Yeah. Yes. This is true. Very few of them make the choice, but the transformation from this ethnic identity to the civic identity is very obvious. So, for example, there is this statesman who used to be very influential in Russia. His name is Vladislav Slurkov, who is a Chechen by
Yes,
nationality,
he was
and
half Chechen.
anyway, okay, he's
Yeah.
half Chechen, but he has no, let's say, culturally, he's very much Russian. And the same goes for a lot of historical figures as well. Russian identity absorbed different ethnicities and united them under the civic umbrella. So I think it still functions today precisely because it's something Vladimir Putin personally believes. I'm not
Yeah,
sure
he
it's
does
gonna.
believe.
I
Well,
don't. I don't. I don't
look.
think like.
Okay, go on.
Yeah, final thought. So
Mhm.
Russia is multicultural, but not in the same sense that Europe is multicultural. Russia is multicultural in the same sense that empires are multicultural. Empires
Yes,
consist of
yes.
different nations, and therefore empires are multinational. But Europe is a nation state without cultural identity. It's not empire anymore. France is not an empire anymore. Spain is not an empire anymore. Sweden never been an empire. And within this non-imperial space, they have different cultures. And this is a collapse. This is a collapse of the civic identity. It's different in Russia. That's what I'm trying to say. Maybe
Yeah,
I'm
but
not eloquent enough to explain, but I'll
yeah,
try better.
so the point with regards to imperial identity is the exact point that I wanted to make. So you've got this Russian ethnic Slavic group that is more than 80% of the population, and then you've got all of these like minor nations that Russia has absorbed into their empire. And a lot of them do appear to have Russian identity. I would say the Germans certainly have, the Tatars, and more advanced, a lot of different groups, but there are specific sort of clusters that you can actually absorb by. So for example, there's this, I believe, Media Zona. They have created a database of from which province of Russia the soldiers have died the most. So if you look at, for example, Tatarstan or a regular Russian province, a lot of people from that province have died. But if you look at Chechnya, if you look at Dagestan, which are quite populous in terms of their demographic, very few people from there actually volunteer to serve in the Russian army, and actually very few of them identify as Russian. That's my own
No, I'm not
experience.
contesting it. I'm not contesting it at all. It's true. That's how things are.
Yeah,
What I'm saying
so
is that
mhm.
there are people who oppose themselves to the Russian civic identity in favor of their own local identity, and it's absolutely the case with the Caucasian region, with the countries in the Caucasus. But there is a obvious route towards for them to become part of the overarching Russian civic identity.
Yeah,
And some
what
people,
you
very few people take it. That's what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, in Europe, the civic identity itself is collapsing because European governments no longer see value in maintaining cultural hegemony. Yeah, cultural. Um, cultural integrity. That's the word I was looking for. For example, what happened in Canada? I
Mhm.
think your prime minister just a week ago said that Canada is not a melting point; it's a
Yeah, it's a
multicultural
mosaic,
space. It's a
mosaic.
mosaic, and there you go. And that's what I mean. And Europe is a mosaic as well.
Yes, certainly, if you look at it through like national lenses. But the point I was trying to make is, yeah, Russia is an imperial state. A lot of these, imperial subjects, they have a right, or I guess an opportunity to join the Russian cultural space, and most Russians would probably accept them in. But here's the thing: the Uzbeks and the Lithuanians, Moldovans, they also had that right. I think 30 years ago, and the empire that Russia had at the time has disconnected. And I
Yeah,
think a lot of the
but it's a process, obviously, and absorption takes time. And to absorb a nationality, like even Ukrainians, they did not absorb completely even after 700 years. So there
yeah.
will always there's always be this gap. But if the cultural space is healthy, it will not collapse onto itself.
Okay, so I actually have a question, and probably a lot of my Western viewers would also have a question. What are your thoughts into like immigration of non-whites, non-Russians, for example, from Tajikistan or from India, that's been recently increasing, India in particular, into Russia, because Russians have they have lost a lot of men. A lot of Russians have fled the country as a result of the war, and currently the Russian government, just like Europe, is importing these third worldists into the country.
Yeah, well, Putin is advancing great replacement, the same that takes place
Yeah,
in the
but
U.S. and in Europe. So
but
that's the main
right.
reason why I say that
Yes,
Russia is
and I
Europe.
completely agree with you. But here's the thing: what if those Indians they eventually will have a choice in front of them to join this Russian imperial identity? Like,
Yeah, okay. First of all, what's the difference between empire and colony? Empire absorbs nations with their territories, and that's how empires used to function. So when we talk about North Caucasus, when we talk about Tatarstan, when we talk about Yakutia, we're talking about territories that were added to Russia as part of the periphery, of the imperial periphery. So when you occupy land, you invite people who nomads or people who live on that land to become part of the great empire. And
yes,
in my opinion, that's the most ethical way of building an empire. What happens in Europe today and what happens in the US is the exact opposite. Empires are shrinking. They are losing
well,
territories.
I
They are
mean, I
surrendering
would
territories, and they're
probably
inviting
okay.
people without land to basically claim part of the empire, claim part of the country. That's the opposite of what is used to happen.
I would say that the Europeans themselves they may not be like imperialists. They more strongly identify with their national identity over the EU, except for Belgium for obvious reasons. But I think that the EU itself, as an organization, there is a form of European sort of subnational imperial identity that is forming, and the way it expands itself is largely through voluntary means, through integration of new member states. Like they're planning to expand into Armenia, Ukraine, and Moldova, and maybe Serbia, and it doesn't happen
But
as
at
a
the same
result of
time,
conquest.
at the same time, as they expand to Moldova, if it's going to happen, or to Ukraine, at the same time, because they are unable to resolve fertility crisis, they are inviting the worldists to actually
Yes.
uh, to use the European land as a frontier for their culture, for their identity, for the expansion of their cultural project. So this is the opposite of being an empire. To me, what happens in Europe and what happens in Canada and US and Australia is puzzling, because I don't understand why the same processes take place in such vastly different places. It's like someone, like the shadow government, world government makes these decisions and everyone else just executes them. Because there's no, like, I have some explanations why it happens, but I'm not satisfied with them completely.
Yeah, well, the point about empires that I think most people see empires is when one ethnic group takes control over territory that is
Yeah.
inhabited by other groups, or when a country sort of becomes expansionary, or it's like a form of authoritarian state that has multiple sort of ethnicities living within it, maybe like India, and they demand for a form of vertical hierarchy that will not privilege one particular ethnic identity over the other. And so I think the European Union matches these three specific criteria of empire building. And at the same time, I think that there is probably less incentive for them to import these third world migrants if they're going to expand into like Ukraine, Moldova, and other states that would provide them with fresh manpower.
I disagree, because if this is the problem that they were trying to solve, they would have just opened the border for Ukrainians without necessarily
They
expanding the
have
border.
done that like 10 years ago, haven't they? Or 12 years ago. When
No,
was
like
that?
a tourist visa and a permit to work are two
My
separate things.
understanding is that they are in the Schengen organization, are they
They
not?
aren't. They aren't in
They
Schengen, but
aren't.
they were granted visa-free travel to
Yeah,
Europe, but
yeah.
for being a tourist, not for being a worker.
Hmm.
So again, it's in my opinion, it's impossible to explain away immigration policy of European Union like you did, because if that was the case, they would have opened the border for the Russians, for the Ukrainians,
Well, I
for
think the reason
Serbians, etc.,
they
etc.
don't open the borders for the Russians is because there is an ethnic animosity towards the Russians. I mean, I think you as a
It
Russian,
wasn't.
that's why
It was not the case 10 years ago. It was
yeah, it
not the
was
case
not.
10 years
Yeah,
ago.
that's right. It was not the case 10 years ago. But now I have seen poll from Czechia. Czechia is a Slavic nation, and they have ranked Indians higher than Russians
Yeah,
in
well,
terms of
that's
having a neighbor, right? So they would rather have
yeah.
Indian
Well,
neighbors than Russian neighbors.
that's a neighbor as a country or a neighbor as a
No, no,
person.
a neighbor, a person living in your apartment building, let's say.
Well, I'm surprised to hear that, but
Yeah, well, I'm not particularly surprised, but yeah, I mean, and look, these Czechs, they have a form of they're
I think they never
developing.
lived next to an Indian. That's my guess.
Um,
It's like,
yeah, well,
these polls that
it
ask a
is
woman
changing
who.
now. Yeah,
It's like these polls where they ask women who would she rather encounter, a bear or a man, and the answer a bear, and the only reason they do is
yeah,
because they
yeah.
never encountered
Look,
a bear.
I completely agree with you, and I just want to add that I think that the reason they prefer Indians over Russians is because of this European civic identity, where they see the Russians are as like inherently, barbaric, aggressive, anti-democratic, whereas Indians, they see them as like migrants who are going to integrate into like the European Union because India is a democracy and they're more closely aligned with the values of the EU. One of these values is importing a lot of people.
I need to check what is the Indian population of Czech Republic because my
Probably around 5,000, but yeah.
there you go. There's your answer. So if you don't have
Yeah.
experience of living next to someone, you are much more likely to give stupid answers like that.
Yeah, well, the broader point I was just making is that there is a form of imperial identity that is developing in the European Union, and that's just one example. They need people, they need territory, and they want to centralize into one state. Um,
I think what you're concentrating on symptoms instead of the cause, because the main cause that is not being resolved is the fertility crisis, and that's
yes.
where Elon Musk is completely on point, at least when he identifies the problem, because the political system, the Western political system, broadly speaking, in the US, in Australia, in New Zealand, in Europe, everywhere, in Russia as well, is not sustainable. It's not self-sustainable. It's a moloch that destroys the population that it relies on to exist. So without actually addressing this issue, which the European countries refuse to address, there is no future for Europe in general.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. But like to me,
Because
it'll. Mhm.
even if let's imagine it's not the case, but let's imagine even if all the immigrants that they're bringing in are gonna assimilate, they're gonna assimilate into the system that actively destroys its population, that is not capable of reproducing its own man. So yeah, you can hoover in, people from other countries, but at certain point you're going to run out of people in Africa as well. Again, and I'm talking about this fantastic scenario where they actually try to integrate, which they don't.
Yeah, and I'm actually like more worried about, these people even coming over than the questions of their integration. Like I would rather have them not integrated at all so that there's less of them coming over. But you seem to be a lot more like pro civic nationalism than I am. I'm like more
No,
to the
like I said, I think we're reaching the point where ethnic nationalism is going to become the only solution. But I don't see it as a good outcome. I think this is going to bring the culture and society backwards, and a lot of horrible things are going to happen before things are going to get better.
Well, in what way would you say, like, for example, if Slovaks were to like form an ethno state for like Slavs only or for Slovaks only, how, in what way would it be backward, since their neighboring countries, they would be overrun by migrants who are from completely foreign, demographic
No,
groups?
but you're taking two extremes. When I'm talking about civic nationalism, I'm talking about the kind of nationalism that existed in Russia, in the Tsarist Russia, which I'm relatively sympathetic towards too.
Yes.
The question, obviously, if you're gonna keep immigration at the kind of levels that it is now, your civic identity is gonna collapse. There's no way you can possibly integrate this
I
number
agree
of
with
people.
you.
What I'm saying is this. Okay, let me put it differently. Just give me a second. I have a note here. I actually wanted to mention it. So the current immigration system is selecting for the worst kind of people. And you want to have an immigration system that actually benefits your society. There has to be some cultural exchange. There has to be some ethnic exchange as well. It happened throughout history. And it was a force of good. But we're talking about a very limited number of people coming from other ethnicities, from other cultures. Maybe the same number that came to Europe in 18th century, 19th century. So we're talking about these kind of
basically
numbers.
zero.
No, not basically zero. Lots of Germans came to Russia.
They're the same race.
No, well,
I mean,
different ethnicities.
Yes, but more or less, I don't think that the Germans had issues integrating into Russia. Considering the German nobility and how high they were sort of intertwined with the machine.
The Germans are not the only ones. There are plenty of there's some Frenchmen came to Russia to live as well during the Napoleonic Wars.
The only problem,
et cetera.
I think, was the Jewish immigration. That they had some problem with integrating.
Well, Jewish immigration is interesting because there's this sentiment, especially in the US, that Jews are great at integrating into societies, which they are really not.
I think the Jews are good at integrating the society towards themselves.
Yeah, I agree with that. And they are good at being beneficial to societies where they live in, to an extent, but they're not integrating. Definitely, that's why Jewish identity exists. That's the only reason why Jewish identity exists, because Jews used not to have a home country of their own for thousands of years. So how do you preserve identity? By not integrating. That's the only way.
That's correct.
So Jews are not integrating, but again, this by itself is not necessarily a problem. The problem is when you lose the sense of identity at all. It's like what I mentioned at the beginning of our conversation is what is a woman, what is a Frenchman, what is an Englishman, and what is a Canadian. Once you reach a certain level of immigration, what is a Russian? But once you reach a certain level of immigration, you lose the sense of what it is actually, what the nation actually is. And we're well past the point.
I think you are dancing around between an ethno-state and a civic state. Like for me, as a person who is, I'm Canadian. I know I have the American flag on the background, on the thumbnail.
I made fun of it when we.
I know, but so we basically. For us, a civic identity is already presupposed within the confines of an ethnic identity. Because what is American civic identity? It was an identity that, Anglo-Saxons have come up with, and they have assumed that the country would always, stay Anglo-Saxon white. And eventually this was expanded to people besides themselves because the American state became an imperial state, and they had to integrate all these, Italian, Jewish, Black, Indian, Mexican migrants from.
I think again, I agree.
Which
I
just
agree.
Didn't work.
I agree in general with you, but I disagree that it didn't work. It's just the pace of immigration is such that. The civil identity starts to mutate as well. The civic identity starts to mutate as well. But you're saying that, the American experiment has been founded on Anglo-Saxon values, but the German stock is just as essential for the American nation as an English stock or a Scottish stock.
Yes.
I'd say
Mhm.
all the major cities in the U.S. were founded by the Dutch. By the New York used to be called New Amsterdam.
Yes, yes.
So the Dutch stock is foundational for the U.S. as well. So it's not as clear cut as you're saying. What I'm saying, and that's why
Hmm.
that's what I meant when I said that that I think ethnic nationalism is inferior to the civic nationalism.
Yeah,
But
and
again,
look, I
only
have
within confines of a
right.
reasonable immigration
That's right.
system.
But yeah, so here's the point that I'm, trying to bring across you is that, yes, I completely agree with you. But at the same time, there is a difference between like bringing over Dutch, Germans, Italians, Russians into the United States, and yes, that they're all broadly European, and they'll follow these Anglo-Saxon ideals of freedom. But when you're bringing in a population that is completely foreign, that has some form of resentment, and that values its own culture, and their own culture does not have an emphasis on, for example, the values of private property, on freedom, on the other Western sort of values and ethnic imaginations of themselves, then the whole system begins to sort of unwind itself, right? And
Yeah, but
you're not
I'm
denying that.
agreeing with I'm
Yeah,
agreeing with
you're
that.
agreeing
Yeah.
with me, but again, like, would you like allow, for example, if you were a president of Russia, would you make any sort of racial quotas or limits, like racial limits on immigration into Russia?
Uh, depends on the situation, but I think immigration from Europe should be facilitated, and
Yeah.
immigration from third world countries should be capped at the limit. So yeah, to me it's obvious. But if you, I think immigration politics should be much stricter than whatever you're asking me right now. I think the best immigration policy that exists today is in the United Arab Emirates, where it's practically impossible to naturalize, and the only way to leave an offspring in that country is to have a national, to have one of the parents to be
Mhm.
a United Arab national. So
Yeah,
that's,
but
in my
the
opinion, that's the only
problem
reasonable immigration policy.
the problem with all of these Gulf states is that essentially they're slowly getting overrun by migrants, and these migrants, they represent a large sort of underclass. I'm not sure this system is very sustainable long term. Because if the Arab majority loses its money, or there is some form of economical or political crisis, these people are going to rise up and demand their rights, and they'll eventually overthrow this Arab authoritarian autocracy.
If they'll manage to organize, yes, but that's not a trivial thing to do, to be honest.
Not right now, but I mean,
I
every
agree. Like
slave wants freedom.
every system has its weak points, and I agree that the Gulf system, the immigration policy of the United Arab Emirates, is has its own weak points as
Yeah,
well.
like,
But
I wouldn't want Canada to be, let's say, 25% white, and all of the non-white people have zero rights. Like, the implication of that are going to be insane.
I agree, but the I think the case of Canada and the case of the United Arab Emirates are completely different, because
Yeah, I
Canada is a
agree with
proper
you.
nation,
Yes.
and
Well, not
United Arab.
according to our government, it's
Well,
not.
yeah, we can discuss that separately. But United Arab Emirates is basically like a few tribes, a few Arabic tribes that controlled the land during the great decolonization of the United Kingdom. So there wasn't enough people to begin with. Where in Canada there already is enough.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we've probably discussed this enough. We spent more than 30 minutes
It's
obsessing over
57
this.
minutes to be
Oh,
to be honest.
57. No, no, that's when we started
Oh,
talking.
okay. All right. All right.
Yeah. Uh yeah, it's one huge topic. We've got also other topics to discuss. I didn't actually talk with you about your political ideology and your journey. I thought maybe I should have asked this first, because so that audience gets an impression of what sort of a person you are ideologically.
Well, in my 20s, I used to be a liberal, but I quickly became libertarian because I saw discrepancies in the liberal ideology that I
Like
started
what?
working through, like the idea of the natural law, natural rights, which not law, natural law is cool, like the idea of natural rights
Well,
and the
a lot of
universal rights.
American libertarianism, they believe in
I know.
natural rights.
Like the only American libertarian that I actually take seriously is Jeremy Kaufman, and
Mhm.
he's kind of a pariah in the libertarian circles himself. So, yeah, the Libertarian Party in the U.S. and the entire libertarian movement is, in my opinion, inadequate as a political group and
Okay,
the
so
ideology.
you don't believe the rights are natural. How rights are
No.
justified by force or by like a general consensus?
First of all, of course, any right has to have a foundation in force, because if you can't enforce a right, there's no way you be able to exercise it. So there has to be a level of force. Just don't confuse force with aggression. These are not necessarily the same thing.
Hmm.
And the question that you need to ask any like left-wing libertarian is, what is the source of the right? Like, what did it come? Where does it come from? Where does it originate? And okay, some religious people may say the God is the origin of rights, and it's a separate topic, but at least they have some answer. But most secular libertarians, they have no answer at all. It's just
Well,
like
they
this the
usually
magic
say
gobbledygook.
consent, contract, or the
Yeah, no, the
goes back to
contract.
John
Contract
Locke.
is a great answer, but that's not the
Yeah.
answer that the libertarians usually give, because the non-aggression principle is a universalist principle. It's the principle they apply to all the people, regardless of them being libertarians, regardless of them sharing the same values as you are, regardless of them being in like the same. Them sharing the same political ideals. So no, non-aggression principle in Rothbardian sense and in the Hoppian sense as well, by the way, is a natural right, which in my opinion is an absurd notion and a self-defeating notion at that. In my opinion, a right can only originate from a contract, and can only originate from a
Hmm.
contract that you can actually defend, because if you can't defend a contract, then well, then there is like no way of you defending the right as well.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. So w- uh, I'm assuming you remain in ideological
I'm a
libertarian now.
libertarian. I'm
Yeah.
100% libertarian.
Mhm.
More and since we're talking about that, I think libertarianism provides answers to the current crisis that we have right now as well, cultural and political, and ideological
Yeah.
as well.
So, since you're a libertarian and that's your ideology, personally, I'm like
I don't like the
sort of
word
more
ideology. I'd
skeptical.
say a set of beliefs.
A set of
That's
values. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, I like a lot of the theory that comes from the libertarian side. I like Rothbard. I like Hayek, although Hayek is moderate. I've read Hoppe. I don't particularly agree with him, but there's certainly the theoretical, the intellectual aspect of the libertarian ideology, certainly more profound than, for example, the far left sort of equivalent, which would be like Marxism or all these ideologies. But I've got a couple of issues I have with libertarianism, but one particular issue that I'd like to discuss, and I think it's the practical issue of how exactly you're going to be selling the libertarian ideology to the masses. So if you look at the United States, people there, they have a very strong civic identity, and a lot of libertarian values appeal to a lot of predominantly white people and white men in particular. And the Libertarian Party there is well represented within the Republican Party. And if the Republican Party were to adopt the Tucker Carlson approach and there was a third party, I think the Libertarian Party would probably get at least 13% of the vote. But if you look at, for example, countries like Russia, if you look at countries like, I don't know, Bosnia, then there's not a particularly high sort of civic identity that would presuppose people to adopt these sets of values which I think are almost unique to Western Europeans and Anglos in particular, who have made most of the contribution to this theory. So how would you attempt to install libertarianism inside of Russia and maybe in other countries?
Well, at the moment, I'm not in the position to install anything in Russia. Unfortunately, I just don't have the resources to even to return to Russia. I mean, political resources, and I'm not able to defend myself. So, but to answer your question, it's funny because you are so deeply entrapped into the paradigm of like this left-wing liberal paradigm that even in asking the question, you are still remain entrapped in it. What I mean is that. The goal is not to win in the election. It's elections are a means to an end. It's not an end in itself. Libertarians are not Democrats. We're not liberals. So the goal that you should strive for, and the thing that you have to realize, first of all, most people are followers. They're not leaders, and they are very inert. So once there's a group of people who can realistically claim power, or who can realistically have a goal at winning anything, they will have followers at this very moment, even among those who criticized them before. So the goal of libertarians is not to win an election. The goal of libertarians is to create a group of people influential enough, powerful enough to lead. And that's the only goal that you actually have to try to reach. So
yeah, so I think what happened in Argentina would probably be an
no,
example.
Argentina is a no. I disagree with Argentina
Okay.
case. I love Milei. He's great. He's much better than anyone else in Argentina. So I don't want to trash talk him or anything like that. But he plays by the rules, by the liberal rules, and he hasn't transformed the country in the slightest. Yes, yet he made some reforms, just like Trump did in the U.S., but he did not change the system, and that's his biggest fault and his greatest shortcoming, and the reason why I'm skeptical of his legacy, just as much as I'm skeptical of the Trump's legacy. Because the reason Trump was elected in the U.S., he was this disruptor figure. He was elected and he was given mandate to transform, to form a new deal, in all honesty, for the U.S., because the old deal, the old way of doing things is clearly not working, is clearly at its wit's end. The same thing happened with Milei. He was given the mandate to transform the political system. Instead, he tries to work within the limits of the system, and that's as good as admitting a defeat. Milei, he's great. He's a great populist. He's a great speaker. He obviously knows how to make people fall in love with him, just like Trump does, but he's not a transformational figure, unfortunately.
Okay,
and the goal, again, to answer your question, the goal of libertarians is to form an influential enough group to actually lead everyone else to the towards libertarianism or towards freer society. That's exactly what the founding fathers in the U.S. did. Do you think the settlers in general had any preconceived notion of what the American Constitution should look like, what values it should enshrine? No, it was a group of people who led the revolution, who actually had this vision of the country that they wanted to build.
Yeah,
and
I
it
think
was a
they
very small group of
carried
people.
the English common law and the Anglo-Saxon values in general, and I think the U.S. Constitution is largely a reflection of these and British values.
Yeah, but it's a reflection done by a very small group of people, because our average settler in the what will become a United States, were not literate enough to conceive a document like that. They were concerned with daily survival and not with building a nation. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, I agree, but every group of people had its elites. Like even on the ships, not just regular people were coming across the Atlantic. So the diversity within the social classes that were transported was always high, and a lot of the American settlers, they knew how to read, and they had very high literacy compared to Europe, certainly compared to Russia. So
Yeah, but it's different. Like the fact that you can read and and being able to conceive nation founding documents are two different levels of expertise.
yeah. Well, anyway, so going back to libertarianism, how would so for example the Russian topic, how would libertarianism be installed there given the current conditions where Putin is repressing every single sort of attempt at democracy from below,
Hmm.
and the Russian people themselves, they don't particularly have a very strong civic political identity. Uh, so what are we going to do?
Yeah, well, Russia is truly subjugated by Putin, and there's not much anyone can do, to be honest. So the best shot that we have is maybe try to conceive an idea that will be heard by someone close to Putin. Like that's what Machiavelli did. He had no chance
Yeah.
at transforming the state, so he wrote a book addressing it to the prince. So he would listen to him. So that's the role I try to take in Russia. So I
So
try
you're
to
institutionalized, Pil. You're one the long march through institutions.
Uh, at this moment, yes, it's just because there's no other option available to me. So
Based. That's
no,
exactly what I'm advocating for myself.
yeah, no, but again, it's not the right answer in every situation. But in the situation that Russia is in right now, it's the only answer.
Hmm. Yeah, and like
Like in the
historically,
U.S., the answer will be different. In the U.S., the
yeah,
answer will be
yeah, it
different.
will be bottom up, but in Russia it will have to be top
Not
down.
necessarily bottom up, but the U.S. provides like a much wider, many more options for political action. So you can infiltrate the one
Yes.
of the existing parties, for example, which is impossible in Russia at the moment. Well, that's
Yeah,
what Trump
well,
did. You
I
can
think
count
you
on you can
can.
count on the historical individual. Again, that's what Trump is. So there are
Yeah.
options, but in Russia, it's the working through institutions is the only way.
Yeah, and it's the only way, and I think also a better way, ironically, is probably getting close to Putin because Russia is like an personalistic autocracy. People who are friends with Putin, I think they have more power than certain branches of the Russian government.
Oh
Do you
yeah, yeah,
agree with
absolutely, absolutely,
that?
yes, yes, I agree with that.
Yeah, but the problem is that Putin is surrounded by yes men and people who have very little understanding of like civic Western values. People who are like blindfolded. A lot of them are resentimental towards the West. They're, like almost you could say they are Eurasianists. Some of them are like combining Tsarism and Stalin, and like all of this is very cringe. And like how do you predict that a person like yourself or a person like myself would get close to Putin, find himself in his surrounding?
Again, the goal is not to get close to Putin personally. The goal is to uh, get your ideas closer to him or to the
Yes.
figure like him. And this is possible because we know that the Russian politicians, they read internet even if they don't reply. They watch the streams, some streams that are very you don't expect them to watch these kind of streams that they do sometimes, and the same happens in the US. So ideas, they propagate of your regardless of whether you have direct influence or not. So that's oops, sorry, sorry, I need to turn on the light or
Mhm.
it's going to be very dark. um, just a second. Sorry, I forgot to plug it in. There we go. Working at the ideas, and the success can happen not during your own lifetime, but maybe sometime later. That's what happened with, gosh, what's his name? Ilyin. That's the philosopher
Yes, the
that used to
philosopher.
write in the early 20th century, and he basically shaped the Putin's worldview today. So this is the
More
kind
so
of
than
goals that I have
Dugin.
right now. More so than Dugin. Yeah,
Yeah.
Dugin is much more famous in the West than in Russia.
Yes, that's correct. And also Ivan Ilyin, the funny thing is that he advocated for an alliance with the United States against Europe because he
I
saw.
see. Of course, it's first of all, it's natural, it's obvious, and Russia is much more akin to the U.S. than to Europe. Russia is a frontier as well, and that's my biggest hope for the future. And how I see that Russia can be transformed is that there's not many frontiers left on Earth, and Russia is the last one. And I want to see Russia get developed the way Canada or United States were developed, and it only takes political will. But unfortunately, there has been none so far.
Yeah, like currently the Russian state is busy fighting in Ukraine and depriving its own citizens of political rights. I think to a degree that no other country does, besides maybe Iran or North Korea. Well, not North Korea. I mean, the people don't have desires even there to begin with, so there's nothing to deprive. But so I think we're getting close to answering questions. I think we should discuss two last topics. So I think the first one is the war in Ukraine, right? Given you're a Russian yourself and you're certainly a patriotic Russian, how do you think, what would be your ideal sort of peace agreement between Russia and Ukraine, and probably more specifically, Russia and the European Union? And what peace agreement do you think will be realistic? Which peace agreement will have?
Well, let's separate realistic and ideal, because these
Yeah.
are two different things. Because ideally, and that's what Putin hoped for, is that this war is going to be akin to the 2014 when he annexed Crimea. It will be bloodless, it will be fast, and
Yes.
it will be effective. But obviously, it didn't happen, and that's why I always say that a mistake is always much more costly than a crime. Because if the crime is effective, nobody will care, and they will just accept the new way of things, the new status quo. But if you trip and you make a mistake, then that's when the real blood shedding starts. So at this point, I think the best realistic option is to stop the war at the contact line. How do you call it in English? I forgot. At the line of.
Well, you can say contact club, the front
Okay.
line. Yeah.
The front, okay. Well, at the front line, and just to try figure out things diplomatically, because nobody is winning from what is happening right now. Like, Russia is losing hundreds of thousands of people, Ukraine is losing hundreds of thousands of people, and at the same time, the fertility crisis is not resolved. So if in
Yes.
20th century you could have said, well, women will have more children, well, they won't anymore. That's not the reality anymore. And what is your project for the future? And Putin has no project for the future. He just tries to save the face and postpone the admission of defeat, because whatever the result is going to be, it's going to be defeat. Even if he annexes certain territories, the price that he paid, that Russian people paid, Russia paid for this war, is such that it will be the Pyrrhic victory.
So your ideal sort of scenario for Russia out of this is just stop the war at the front lines. What about NATO? What about the rights for ethnic
Well,
Russians inside you?
Putin gave NATO a lifeline. NATO
Yes.
was mid-collapse before the war, and if you remember, even France questioned the necessity of NATO. Emmanuel Macron famously questioned it just before the war. So the mistakes were made, horrible mistakes, and I think Putin's legacy is tarnished forever by this war. Not because he started it, but because he lost it. And again, this is how history works. I know that there will be lots of Ukrainians in the comment section saying, look, Mikhail says that the war is good if it's being won. No, what I'm saying is that history, works in certain patterns. And if you are victorious, then history will be, how do you say it in English? Then history will be gentle to you.
So you do believe that Russia is losing the war, and even
Yeah.
if it's going to be a ceasefire, it's ultimately going to be a loss for Russia. But a lot of people, especially in the European Union, they believe that if the war were to stop at the front lines, the Russia would have, would get rewarded because they have annexed all of these new territories which they didn't control before. Right. So there's multiple interpretations whether it is a loss or
Yeah, I've heard this opinion many times before, but what is your answer to it? First of all, it's not a reward because the price that Putin paid is enormous and that Russian people paid is enormous. So it's not a
yes.
reward. Like what you get in return is rubble. Original idea of this war was that Putin wanted to protect Russian people, and instead he destroyed Russian cities in Ukraine and razed them to the ground. So this is not a victory; it's a Pyrrhic victory.
Yes.
So it's not a reward, first of all. Second of all, what is alternative? Alternative is keep warring. Alternative is keep destroying the livelihood of hundreds of thousands of people until what? Until there's nobody left in
Until the
Ukraine and
European
Russia?
Union joins the war, probably.
Yeah, well, that's a disaster. Like,
Yeah.
what is? There's always this comparison with the Second World War, and I'm always fascinated by people glamorizing it almost because, like, what is the best? Like everyone keeps asking, like, what if the war started earlier, if the Germans were not allowed to annex a part of Czech Republic, Czech Republic back then. Sudets, I think it's in English, right?
So that
they were not,
yeah.
if they were not allowed to annex Sudets, then they wouldn't move forward. First of all, it's not the best. First of all, it's not guaranteed because the Germany was war bound. Second of all, the best solution, the best alternative to the Second World War would have been Germany stopping at the Sudets, and that was the best
Yes.
available option. So the same with Russia. If the war will stop at the front line, that will be good because
Yes,
it will mean people will stop dying.
I actually like. I mean, I completely agree with you. Although I probably prefer some clarity with regards to NATO and the Russian population, which does remain in Ukraine. I mean, I think you have to touch these issues because they're quite important,
Yeah,
especially.
I think Russian, like I think first of all, the best solution for Putin that was available to Putin is to offer Russian citizenship to the Russian nationals in Ukraine. It should have been a straightforward procedure, and like the one that Israel has for Jews. And I don't understand why it hasn't been done. And
It
if the
has
goal,
been done in the Donbass to some degree.
well, not anywhere close to the degree that it should have been done.
Yeah.
It was done for the people of the DNR and LNR, but it was not done for the people from
DPR and
the DPR.
LPR.
Yeah, sorry,
Yeah.
I forgot how it's called in English.
Yeah.
So DPR and LPR, but it hasn't been done for the Russians in Odessa. It hasn't been done for the
Yeah,
Russians in
I
Kiev.
actually agree with you because I don't see for Ukraine guaranteeing any rights for the Russian citizen. Sorry, not citizens, ethnic Russians living there. I think they're going the full de-Russification mode. They have even removed legal protections against. Like they have this European chart of protecting every language, and they just made an exception for Russian, and that's just the latest of the things that they have done. But once we stop the war at the front lines, you'll have a situation in which there's probably around 1 million uh, pro-Russian Ukrainians or like ethnic Russians living in Ukraine. That's going to be still based in Ukraine, and there will also be a lot of, I guess, occupied Ukrainians living inside of Russia. I'm talking about the Kherson regions, the Zaporozhye regions. A lot of
That's what I'm
these
saying.
people,
The war hasn't been well thought out, and
yeah,
the only solution now is just to let Ukrainians go if they want to leave, and invite Russians if they want to come,
yeah.
and
So
give them
would
the
you
yeah.
support like a population or transfer, like the Operation Vistula in Poland after World War II?
No, I don't think it should be. I don't think it should be done top down. But I think that people should be given an option to move. Yes.
Okay, and what about NATO? What happens if Ukraine joins NATO, or if there are tens of thousands of European troops inside of Ukraine, in Odessa and other countries? Aren't you afraid that eventually the Europeans would, I guess, launch a war of aggression to regain these territories that Russia currently occupies?
The problem with Europe is not that they don't have enough territories; it's that they don't have enough people. So I don't quite understand the goal of such a war. They are
Well, the
replacing their
goal
own
is to
populations
punish
right now.
Russia, obviously. That's the goal.
Well, if it's
Russia
the
is
yeah,
a
well,
competitor and a threat to Europe. They don't like
well,
Russia.
Russia
They're
has
open
nukes.
about it.
Russia has nukes, and
Russia has nukes, but it has not used the nukes.
it hasn't used the nukes because it hasn't fell the victim of the war of aggression since it got
Okay,
one.
that's the
So,
point.
so that's the point. Yeah, and talking about NATO, well, the war provoked the war provoked Finland and Sweden to join NATO, which
Yes.
kept neutrality since the Cold War. So we already have the border with NATO, and it's quite a large one.
Yes, but there are also territorial disputes with NATO. If Ukraine were to join NATO, nobody would
Yeah,
recognize that.
no, if yes, yeah, that's another thing. If Ukraine was to join NATO, it has to revoke claims for Crimea and LPR and GPR, which
What
pretty
about
much
the other
solidifies
territories
the
that
new
Russia
consensus.
controls? The Zaporizhia, the Kherson.
Again, these issues have to be solved diplomatically because Russia is incapable to solve them by military means, and we've been witnessing this inability for the last 4.5
Well,
years.
the Russians control it, and there is no threat of Ukraine. I mean, there is a threat, but there is no real possibility of Ukraine conquering them back, at least in the present conditions. But that could might easily change if there was a European army base in Ukraine, or if Ukraine was a NATO member.
Uh, I don't quite understand your point. I'm sorry, you have to repeat yourself.
Yeah, so the point is that the territories which Russia controls now, I think, would be more precariously held if there was no a proper agreement, preferably before the war ends, of what to do with them in the future.
Yeah,
Because there is. Mhm.
again, I agree, and I think this kind of agreements could have been reached in Anchorage when Russians
I
spoke with the
think they
Americans.
were reached, but the problem is that Zelensky, he just said no, and there was no way for Trump to order him around.
Uh, Again, that's what diplomacy is like. You negotiate until you reach some common ground, and at different stages of war, it was as well. It was Ukraine as well as Russia who missed the opportunity to
Yes,
finish it
yes.
earlier. So, I think there was a chance, and I'm saddened that it did not materialize.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. So I guess the last topic that
Hmm.
we shall discuss is I guess, the future state of relationship between Russia, the EU, the United States. Where do you see these things developing, and where would you prefer them to develop? In what direction?
So it's hard to predict how things will actually develop because the war is still unresolved. But I think Europe has no future without Russia because it doesn't have enough resources. It doesn't have enough energy to sustain itself. So the symbiosis between Russia and Europe will prevail in the future, and I think there's no there's no other way out for Europe if it wants to keep existing. But I think we will reevaluate everything that's happening right now after the civil unrest starts in Europe, which I think is inevitable. And God knows how the world will look then. Because, well, I can't imagine, like, I think the main reason why the European establishment actually wants war is because they hope it will solidify the new European identity which it has no
Yes.
other means of solidifying because of the multiculturalism of the last 20 years. So this is actually my explanation of why there's so much warmongering in Europe. It's not that they hate Russia. It's not that they actually think the war will be easily won. It's because it's their only solution to forge a new European identity. That's what I think they're planning to do. But I'm not sure it's going to work, precisely because the fracture of these different European identities already went too far, and I can't really imagine like a Turkish nationalists or like Somali nationalists taking part in a European war and risking their lives for what exactly?
Well, yeah, I think they'll have plenty of Europeans who'd be willing to risk and die for, this
Well, then,
future European
I
empire at the expense of Russia. Don't you think that?
I'm not sure. I think again, I might be wrong, but
Yeah, I saw polls in Finland.
you
More
have
than
these like
60% of Finns are willing to die for their
yeah. Well,
country.
Poland is a special case.
So no,
Poland.
did I say Poland? I thought I said Finland.
Oh, Finland.
Maybe I did say Poland.
You did
Maybe
say Poland.
I
You
had.
did say Poland. I
Okay,
agree that
okay, but
Poland is actually war capable and has enough of the war spirit to actually do something like that if they wanted to.
yeah,
But
but
I'm not sure it's true about Germany. I'm
the
not sure it's
thing
true
is,
about
yeah,
France.
and I agree with you. But the countries which are bordering Russia, I'm talking about Finland, the Baltic states, Poland, and of course Ukraine, which is eventually going to be part of the EU. They want to fight. Well, not all of them,
Again,
but a good
uh,
portion.
Baltic states are a joke. So let's not talk
Well,
seriously about their
I
military
mean, I'm not
capabilities.
sure. What? Not like it's not about their military capabilities. There are at least, I think, 30 or 40,000 of German and other European troops that are already based in the Baltics states, and they're allowing for Ukrainian drones to attack
Yeah, but
St.
it's a proxy
Petersburg.
war. Yeah, proxy war. Is already happening, and it's been happening for a while. I agree with that. But
Yeah, but
again,
like
Russia still
I'm
has
just
nukes.
saying
Russia
that
still has nukes.
Russia
I
still
don't see
has
a good
right.
solution I don't see a good path for this war for Europe. As long as Russia still has nukes, and unless they have like some deep-seated mole in the Russian government who will sabotage the missile plans or something like that, I don't understand how this war can actually end good for anyone.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I'd prefer therefore not, to be war between Russia and the European Union. I'm just saying that there are certain, I guess, um, potential escalations that are very highly concentrated in the Baltic states, in Ukraine, in all of these countries bordering Russia, that perhaps maybe even Russia will have to do something. Perhaps Russia shoots down a drone which flies over Latvia that is going to target oil refineries in St. Petersburg, and maybe the European Union would have to mobilize and do something. Things are getting very precarious, and I don't think it would be like a one way like war of aggression like the Operation Barbarossa or like the Napoleonic invasion or the Crimean War. I think it will be something like a spark that would ignite the flame.
Well, let's hope it won't. Let's hope cooler heads prevail again, because I don't like the same thing I was telling in 2022 before the war erupted, that I don't see a good path to victory. And the war started anyway, so I was wrong, but I was right about there's no being a clear path to victory. And the same thing about war with Europe. If Europe decides to wage war against Russia, I guess it might happen, but I don't see how it can end well for Europe either way.
Yeah, like the thing is that I'm friends with a lot of Russian nationalists, and their position is that Europe is already at war with Russia, and their position is that Russia just chooses not to respond to Europe.
I disagree with that notion. I mean, Europe is in proxy war with Russia. It's true, but there's a huge difference between a proxy war and a direct confrontation.
Yes.
And I think it's the same mistake that Europeans did, that Ukrainians did. Sorry, when they were saying that Ukraine has been at war since 2014. There is a difference. There's a difference between what happened in 2014
Hmm.
and what happens now, and millions of people who were displaced, who lost their relatives, children, husbands, etc. They understand this difference very well. So let's not use such strong words to describe something very benign, because otherwise we will normalize a much worse future than actually has to be.
Um, yeah, I actually agree with you. So I agree with you over, these Russian nationalists whose arguments I have provided to you. I think Russia's best course of action is just end it as soon as possible and not allow for potential conflict with the European Union, because I think first of all Russia is going to lose this war, but second of all, if somebody uses nukes, it will be an immediate escalation towards total annihilation, right? And the Europeans, there's a lot of European powers who have nukes, and uh,
There's actually
I
just
think,
two. It's
well,
France and England.
there's just two, but what one Poland has, like, a lot of European states have, like, they have nukes based inside of their country, right? And
Yeah,
so
American
they can
nukes. Yeah.
yeah, and I think in the case of war, especially in the case of multiple nuclear explosions inside of the European Union, they would probably not ask the Americans for permission if they could launch it themselves somehow.
No, they can't. They can't. Americans control those nukes. So, but anyway, just to conclude
Yeah,
this
yeah,
section of our talk,
yeah.
the war in Ukraine is a war of folly, and the war between Russia and Europe will be even more so a war of
Yes.
folly, because like the future generations will look at what is happening right now in total perplexity, because we are in civilizational crisis. The fertility rate is the one we discussed today is at the historic low, and instead of solving the great replacement is taking place, and instead of addressing these real issues that are paramount for survival, European nations are waging wars against each other. Trying to bring the end even closer. So what is happening right now is a folly, and my hope is that cooler heads will prevail eventually, but it's just a hope, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think that's a great note to, I guess, end the, like, main segment of our discussion and go to the questions from the audience. So I have
All right.
6 questions that I've prepared beforehand. They're from my Telegram channel and Twitter. And
Mm-hmm.
if I see any more questions from YouTube, I guess we have like 15 to 25 minutes to discuss them, and then we'll have to end the stream. So the first question is from Poglavnik ORX, asking why Russian right wing is obsessed with mixing Tsarist and communist pasts together in Putinism instead of having political and psychological clarity in a better coherent framework.
Well, I think the simple answer is that the Soviet period destroyed the civic identity that the Tsarist Russia had, and then when Soviet Union collapsed, there was no new civic identity built upon the ashes. So now people are just grasping for some historical high notes to identify themselves with something. And there's been a great talk. Well, there's been this process of trying to find a foundational idea for the Russian national for the Russian nation during the first four terms of the Putin presidency, and basically the only foundational idea they found is the Great Patriotic War, which is not
Mhm.
enough to build a nation. But to answer the question, it's because we used to have we used to share these two very distinct civic identities that shaped us as a nation, but they sort of collapsed onto themselves twice, and now that's all that we have left. So we're just picking up the pieces.
Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, and here's a like question from me. Would you say that this concentration on the Great Patriotic War and the framing of the Great Patriotic War as like a Russo war against like the collective like European Union, which the Nazi Germany represented at the time, would you say it's an appropriate framework, or would you say that it's a problematic framework?
It's a problematic framework because the entire history of the Second World War and the Patriotic War is so greatly simplified that it became almost a parody of itself. We are
Yeah.
not able to analyze what actually happened during that historical period because it's so foundational to Europe and to Putin's regime as well.
Yes.
And I think that's actually the biggest weakness of the current status quo is because like everyone accuses everyone of being a Nazi. You know, Russians accuse Ukrainians of being Nazis, Ukrainians accuse Russians of being Nazis, and Europeans accuse Russians and Ukrainians being Nazis, depending on the context. Like what happened in Poland a couple of weeks ago, they were upset with Ukrainians naming a military regimen after some leaders of the Ukrainian Patriotic Army. I think it was called. Yeah.
Yeah.
So everyone
Um,
everyone is a Nazi. If everyone is a Nazi, nobody is a Nazi. And the reason we're at such a point is because the history of the Second World War and the Great Patriotic War has been propagandized to oblivion, and nobody actually understands what was happening back then. And
yeah.
everyone is stupid because of it.
Yeah, that is sort of the the unique takes that I'm following you for. So thanks for this take. The next question from Casimir: what was the last libertarian book or essay he read?
I haven't read anything written by libertarians in a long while because, to be honest, I think libertarian thought is stagnating, and some of the fresher thoughts that exist in the libertarian kind of paradigm are the ones I'm writing. And again, in the English-speaking world, the only person I find interesting is Jeremy Kaufman, and he hasn't written much. So.
Hmm. Yeah, that's unfortunate. So we've got another question from Chen's Bro. After taking power, LOL, Zelensky's party branded itself as libertarian, LOL. How do you feel his libertarianism has actually worked out in practice for these 7 years?
Well, they the next week after announcing that, they actually issued a statement saying that no, we are not libertarian. They are not libertarians. So I don't really need to refute anything because the party of Zelensky is not libertarian, and they only claimed to be one for like less than 7 days. But the moment they issued this statement, I actually wrote an opinion about it, saying that Zelensky never pronounced a single libertarian thought in his life. He never claimed to be libertarian before that. His reforms do not resemble libertarian reforms, and this is just gobbledygook. And
Yeah, it's a trolling question. There will be
yeah,
another.
I understand. No, but
Yeah,
I always answered
yeah.
even trolling questions seriously, just to be clear.
Yeah, so there's another question. It's not a trolling question, but it's also a little bit political. So, from Prometheus show, thoughts on Tucker Carlson saying he likes Putin more than Zelensky in his recent Chris Cuomo interview.
Well, everyone is entitled to have their own opinions. I think there's a lot of good things you can say about Putin. Not saying that he's a good person, but you stay in power for almost 30 years only if you're extremely competent at your job. At least you have to be competent at staying at power. And Zelensky himself, I think he was manipulated by the European elites to make some serious mistakes that I'm wary of saying provoked the war, because by saying provoked the war, I kind of relieve Putin of the responsibility, which I don't
Yes.
want to do. But I do think that war was inevitable, and that certain mistakes were done by Zelensky that facilitate its start.
Yes, I agree with you. But like personally, who do you like more? Do you like Zelensky or do you like Putin
I
more?
understand Zelensky better than I understand Putin, simply because he hasn't been in power for as long as Putin was, and because he
What
is.
if he were in power since 2000?
Sorry?
What if Zelensky was in power since
Well, then
2000?
he would have been a different person completely. And the other reason why is that Zelensky is at least accountable to someone. Putin is not accountable to anyone. And I know there's some people think that,
Yes.
we have to have a god emperor, and it's good that Putin is untouchable. But look, what kind of mistakes this kind of person can make. So I'm wary of choosing between the two because I don't like either of them, because I think for both of them ends justify the means, and they are not representing the interests of their respective nations at all.
Uh, yeah, I think I agree with you. There is a question from Kievian rapist. What are his thoughts on Janusz Korwin-Mikke? So that's the Polish far right nationalist who is also friendly with Russia. What are your
I
thoughts
I,
on him?
I have no thoughts on him because I know he exists, but that's pretty much all I know.
Hmm. He's also a libertarian. I'm surprised you're
What's his
not
name again? Janosch.
Janusz Korwin-Mikke. He's
Oh,
like an
Corby.
old
It's the one.
Polish aristocrat.
Oh, right. All right.
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay. It's the one who has pictures with cat boys and things like that, right?
yeah, he's like a Polish Zhirinovsky kind of
Okay, yeah,
person.
then I know who he's talking about. Yeah, I don't like this strain of libertarianism. It's clownish and does a disservice to the whole idea. And unfortunately, there's a lot of personalities like that in the libertarian camp.
Hmm. So you're against cat boys and all of that sort of
I'm not
nonsense.
against cat
Oh,
boys.
by
I'm
the
just
way,
I'm just
um,
no no I
mhm.
just think that if you want to be taken seriously, you have to be serious, and there is a time and place for joking and clowning and etc etc. And I'm not against people being fans of cat boys, even if I'm not. But if you're uh, if you're taking a political role, you have to take a responsibility as well.
Yeah.
But again, I might be wrong. Like this is my personality. Look at God, Argentinian president. What's his name? I forgot.
Millet,
Milei.
Javier
Yes,
Millet. Yeah.
Javier Milei. Look at Javier Milei. He's pretty clownish himself, but he has charisma and he won elections. So there are different ways of becoming popular. It's just does not resonate with me what he does.
Yeah, so actually, I was in like a conference a couple of hours ago with Nikolai Ostrovsky and a couple of other people, and we were sort of talking about my upcoming interview with you. And one of the questions that they wanted me to ask you was like your take on Looksmaxxing and Clavicular, and that it's garnered a lot of interest. Maybe you could restate the
Yeah,
stake.
well, again, I think looksmaxing as a movement is pretty faggish. I'm sorry to say that, and I don't
Hmm.
think that's something a man should concentrate too much on. And it doesn't mean that you have to look like shit and smell bad and not take shower. No, you should look good, but if you shouldn't invest too much into looks, because that's not what women find attractive in men, even if someone told you otherwise. It's just not true, and it's not the best use of your time, effort, and yeah, it's not the best use of your time and effort. So I'm very skeptical of looks maxing. And
Yeah, so a person who's into looks maxing, they may, look at you and say, well, of course you're going to say that. You look pretty, you look reasonably attractive, and you never have to worry
yeah,
about how you.
but that's the thing. We're not talking about looking your best. We're talking about looks maxing. These are two different things. Of course, you should look after yourself. Like take a shower and comb your hair and brush your teeth and maybe use a cream for your face if you don't want to be covered in spots, etc. But you shouldn't concentrate too much. It shouldn't take too much of your time. It shouldn't take too much of your effort because the returns are really diminishing for the man
Hmm.
or a man.
Well,
Sorry.
after like you said that, I just want to read you 5 comments from five
Okay.
different people who wrote, looks maxing is based, blue pill cope, just take a shower. Svetov is just chat splaining, take a shower theory, just wash your penis.
Yeah, you
Like,
really should. You really should. And that's yeah.
yeah, no, I mean it's hilarious.
No, I understand. I'm just saying that it's like Looksmaxxing exists entirely in this feminist kind of paradigm, because that's not the role of a man to be, good looking and striking. I mean, it's good if you are, but that's not what women look in men. And if your goal is not to be some twink and attract homosexuals, then just look at what women find attractive. Leonardo DiCaprio dates models, and they date him not because of his looks. He doesn't have them anymore, but he's just as popular. Think about it.
He has status, I would say.
Yeah, but So,
Legacy.
but a woman can win status by her looks. A man cannot.
I think
Or
Clavicular proves you wrong. Essentially, he won
Clavic-
his status through looks alone.
Clavicular is, in my opinion, is anti-charismatic, and he would make himself a favor if he actually tried to boost his charisma instead of reshaping his nose and things like that, or instead of putting
Yeah,
laws
the
into his
nose
legs.
was a complete like our loss, but before the nose, I think he mocked everyone and he
No,
looked very
he's a sweet looking for a fag. That's what I'm saying.
Okay, well, I guess we could end on this note. There's a final question from Telegram and Twitter, and it's from a guy. I read his question before. It's from Chance Bro, and the question: does Mikhail Lichter, and that's like a joke. Svetov means light, and Lichter means, I guess, light in Yiddish.
In
And so
German,
yeah,
it's I was awarded I was awarded a prize in one of the human rights organizations in Germany, and they accidentally translated my last name into German for some reason, and now everyone is convinced that my
Yes.
last name is Lichter, which it never was.
Yes, and so does Mikhail Lichter have any Jewish ancestry? And a lot of also people I noticed on Telegram and also on YouTube, they called you a Jew and like Jew this, Jew that. Like where's that even coming from? So can you
It's
just
I
explain
have
this?
yeah, I have no idea where it's coming from, and I have nothing against Jews, and I actually would love to have ancestry so I can get an Israeli passport, because my documents are expiring, and I'm actually in a very tough situation right now because of that, because I can't get new documents from the Russian embassy because I'm in because I'm
Yes.
wanted in Russia. So I'd love that, but unfortunately, this option is not available to me. So what can I say?
But by the way, just my own curiosity. I know that you have some Belarusian ancestry. I'm not
Yeah, I
sure how
do.
much. Yeah, like what is your ethnic makeup in general?
I have some Polish. Well, again, I identify as a Russian. I don't have
Yes.
any other identity. But my ancestors, some of them came from Baltic states, I think from Lithuania, some Polish blood, and Belarusian. My great grandfather, he was a very famous Belarusian painter,
Yes.
and his name is Witold Kaitanovich Belnitsky Berula, which is a very typical name for a region. And that's why my son's name is named Kaitan, because his father was Kaitan.
Yeah, but like in terms of ancestry, like how would you estimate Great Russian percentage of your ancestry from the total? Like for example, for me it's 60
I'd say,
something percent.
I don't know. I haven't thought about it, but I'd say
You
80.
have not taken the DNA test?
No, never. But I'd say 80, maybe
80%. Yeah.
something like that. Yeah, because my mother and my father, they are Russian, ethnic Russians.
Yeah, so you're more Great Russian than I am. I assumed you were like half Belarusian, something like that, but
No,
now it's
it's like most of my family has always lived in Moscow since the time immemorial, and thanks to
yeah.
my like I can trace my heritage back to the 17th century pretty much. Hasn't been like big names, but big enough to warrant some some notice in history books. Yeah, but I'm a Muscovite. Like there's a saying in Russia that there's no heritage Muscovites. Well, I am heritage Muscovite.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, so now we're coming to the questions from YouTube. There are a few questions already. If there's more, you have like 7 minutes probably to write them down. So the first one from Laventhal 4373. It's funny watching self-proclaimed libertarians defend the same old Russian nationalist nonsense. If you admire that system so much, maybe you'd be happier living under it. You should be deported from Brazil, assuming.
Yeah, well, I think we spent almost 2 hours talking how I despise Putin's regime and how it's bad for Russia and how it does not represent what I think is good for Russia. So I don't know where this kind of question comes from, but I think you did a poor job listening to our conversation.
Yes, I completely agree with Svetov here. So the next question, I think it might be a meme, but I'll read it nonetheless.
Okay.
How about neo-libertarian phalangism?
I'm not sure what neo-libertarians means, to be honest. So yeah, let's just skip it. I'm not sure how to answer that.
Mm-hmm. So a Chinese person, I can't even pronounce the name, has asked the following question: his thoughts on race science and birth rates, and what will be done about it in a libertarian state that prioritizes freedom over genetics or natalism.
Oh, that's a great question. I think there is a solution to the fertility crisis, but there's not a single answer to how it can be resolved. So, what part of the answer is allow hyper-religious enclaves within your state, like what exists in Israel, the only country with fertility rate above replacement, and like what exists in United States and Bolivia, by the way, because Bolivia has a sizable, I think it's Bolivia has a sizable Amish population as well. You have to have you have to allow hyper-religious enclaves to exist because yes, they will reproduce themselves, but also the part of their population will leak into the general population as well and take part in the secular life of the state as well. So this is part of the answer. This is not all the answer, but it's part of the answer. Another part of the answer is government should loosen its control over the family. I think this is the most toxic idea that right-wingers have in the West, in my opinion, is that they believe that there is a certain good way to have a family. There is not. And historically, in Europe, in England, everywhere in the West, when fertility rate was above replacement, there were families that we would consider dysfunctional. There were children that grew up in an environment that would say is not appropriate, is not appropriate for children. Like they grew up on the streets, they were underfed, etc., etc. And it's a tragedy. It's a personal tragedy. And I'm not saying it's good. What I'm saying is that by preventing by creating preventive measures for people to reproduce, you end up in a society that is incapable of reproducing itself. And in my opinion, a life is a winning ticket, and it's a chance at success. And instead of penalizing people for procreating, we should actually allow them to procreate, even if we don't think that a certain family can provide a good childhood to a person. So again, this is it goes against this liberal dogma about the child rights, etc. But in my opinion, a liberal dogma is a moloch.
So would you like privatize foster homes, foster care? Would you like lower taxes for people?
Well, foster care. See, the thing about foster care is that the fertility rate is so low is that there are actually fewer children than people who are willing to adopt them. Mm-hmm. So it's not even a question in the reality that we live in right now. There are no more foster comes left.
Yeah, I actually agree with you. I just learned recently that there is no country on planet Earth where you can voluntarily hand over your child to a care just because you want to. You have to
No,
keep it.
I think you're wrong, actually. No, 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 that can be true. I know that in Russia you can give a child to a foster home, and I'm pretty sure
Really.
it's yeah, I'm
I
pretty sure it's the
I
case.
I spent like 20 minutes arguing with Claude about it, and specifically the Russian example. Apparently, that's illegal. So,
Uh,
um,
if it may be like illegal in some
it probably
formal
not
sense, but
enforced.
it's not
Yeah,
it's definitely not enforced. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Well, I think Russia could really boost up its fertility rate if it were to properly legalize foster care. But
It's
yeah, I
just
mean, mhm.
the West is paralyzed by its own ideals and by its own vision of what a proper livelihood should be like. And in my opinion, that's actually exactly what Bible warns against. Is because you're surrendering life to a moloch of your own ideals, and that's something we should get rid of. So again, this is
Mhm.
not a very let's say, comfortable answer to many, but it's the right answer.
Okay, so I guess I should stop the questions here. If you didn't like write any questions, I won't be reading them because a few questions have been asked. Question from Andy Miller 4134: Who is your favorite Tsar, and what do you think of Tsar Nicholas II?
Well, I'd say Nicholas II is my least favorite Tsar because he abdicated, he betrayed his people, and he betrayed his royal responsibility to defend the interests of Russia um, in favor of his family, and that's with great power comes great responsibility, and he betrayed that responsibility. So I have no respect for Nicholas II. My favorite Tsar. It's a difficult question because there are the great people are not measured by the same standards that people in your life. Peter the Great was great. That's why he's called that. And he transformed Russia, and in my opinion, he transformed Russia to better. So yeah, I'd say Peter the Great, Alexander the Second.
Alexander this. Mhm.
Yeah, is my second choice, and it's unfortunate that. Uh, it's unfortunate that he wasn't able to finish his reforms. Yeah.
Yeah, and what's most unfortunate is that he was killed by by supporters of these reforms.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah. Again, I agree that reforms were not as they were not coming as fast as they were supposed to, but it was a civilizational chance for Russia to avoid the catastrophe of 1917.
yes, and I think that the earliest reform would probably be the abolition of serfdom, and
Yeah,
very
yeah.
quickly after that, they should have remade their system into some form of electoral democracy. But anyways, the last question for today is, sorry if late, but what he thinks of Nick Fuentes.
I think Nick Fuentes is very talented. He's very interesting to listen to. I don't think he has a coherent ideology, and I think some of the ideas that he's a proponent of are quite dangerous and not very constructive. But again, you have to have someone who pulls the society to the right. I always say in my own streams that you have to protect your own extremists, you have to protect your own radicals because they are the ones who are doing all the dirty work. And he's doing the dirty work for the
Mhm.
right wing in the US. So I have immeasurable respect for him for that, even if he's becoming toxic in certain circles, and even if his own political project is dangerous. But it's important to have people like him on the fringe. So respect.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean that's how the left treats their own, and it seems
Exactly,
to be
exactly.
working. And
It is
so
working.
whatever is working, we should adopt.
Yeah.
But like, what do you think? That's just my last question. I think one of the latest Nick Fuentes' strategies, the political strategies, is to undermine the Republican Party and have the Democratic Party win elections, so that the Republican parties will course correct towards stuff more aligned with America first. I think Tucker Carlson is doing precisely that. He's planning to create a third party to steal votes away from the Republicans, so that the Democrats could win elections, and that every time that the Republicans are going to align themselves with Israel, every time the Republicans are going to not deliver on American first, the Republicans are going to be punished by these forces like Nick Fuentes and Tucker
So
Carlson.
yeah, I got the question. So I disagree with the idea of the third party. That's not how U.S. American political system works, and it's just gonna ruin everything for the right wing. So, but I agree with Nick Fuentes, but with an asterisk. I
Mhm.
think it's a sound strategy deep in the which red region. Yeah, red is Republicans, right?
Yes, yes.
So yeah, it's a sound strategy deep in the red regions of the U.S. So if you can primary a Republican on the primaries by supporting American first candidate, that's a great strategy. But you have to be wise enough to distinguish between competitive states and non-competitive states, between competitive how do you call voting regions.
Purple states, swing states.
Yeah, yeah. So if he's going to do it in a swing state, then he's doing harm. Then
Yeah, but
he's
that's sort
defeating.
of
He's self-defeating.
yeah, but that's sort of the theory, to self defeat your to like destroy the Republican Party from within, to punish it as hard as humanly possible,
Oh, you should
so that
punish. You should punish it
they're
within.
incentivized to reform.
Yeah, I don't think it was going to send the right message. What the message is going to send is that the minorities are a more reliable voting bloc, and Republicans will just try to appease them.
Yes, but like, what if you don't do that? The Republicans are just going to continue pursuing this, like whatever they were pursuing for like
But
50
yeah, yeah, no,
years.
no, I agree. I agree with the criticism of Nick Fuentes, of criticism that Nick Fuentes addresses to a Republican Party. It's definitely the case. They did not conserve anything. Like they call themselves conservatives, and all they did in the last 60 years, 70 years is just backtracked and accepted the progressive reforms. So I agree with that. I'm just saying that you have to have a different strategy in swing state and in a deep red state. And if you have the same strategy in both of them, then you're doing something wrong.
Hmm. Well, okay, I think we could probably finish on this note. We've been talking for exactly 2 hours.
Yep.
Is there anything that you'd like to say at the end of the stream?
No, I enjoyed our conversation. I didn't expect. I expected some other topics to be brought up today, but maybe next time. I enjoyed.
Yeah,
Thanks for having
yeah.
me. And sorry, I haven't had a conversation in English for a while, so my English is a bit rusty. But I hope
Well,
I
I think your
had my.
English is probably better than mine, even though I have lived in Canada for more than 10 years.
All right.
So I think you're doing great. Yeah, and also I just want to say that thanks to Twitter, they're now translating your tweet. So if your tweet is written in Japanese, it would be automatically
Hmm.
translated to the language of your.
Babylonian Twitter.
Yeah, exactly, of your system. And so you could give Mikhail Svetov a following on Twitter, and even though he writes in Russian, the tweets are going to be automatically translated to English. And I think that's one of the best features from Elon Musk's Twitter. And I think that's excellent that they've done it.
All right, agreed. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks for
Well.
having me, and thanks for everyone who joined in. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Ciao. Bye bye.
Bye.